Welcome to another episode of Ecoville. I'm your host, Nonsigelelo Kwaka, and thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to join us every Wednesday for your weekly dose of your favorite environmental podcast. To become a member of our Eco Village, please subscribe to our channel and follow us on our social media pages. Our handle is EcovilleZW on all platforms. World Wetlands Day is celebrated every year on the 2nd of February to raise global awareness about the value of wetlands for humanity and the planet. Today on the show, we are joined by Dorothy Wakeling, who focuses on education and awareness of wetland restoration at the Harare Wetlands Trust, which is a coalition of organizations advocating for the protection and preservation of wetlands. She's here to tell us more about wetlands and their importance. Welcome to the show, Dorothy.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Thank you for taking time out to come and talk to us. Can you please tell us about your organization and when and why it was established?
Our organization is Harare Wetlands Trust. It was established in 2016, and it arose out of the work that had been done at the Conservation Society of Mona Vale on the Mona Vale Flay. The Mona Vale Flay work has been going on for 20 years, restoring and preserving that wetland. So the work that we did there was shared with many other communities. And then there was a need to make an umbrella organization, which is what happened in 2016.
So thank you for telling us about the establishment of your organization. Now, can you please tell us why wetlands are so important?
Wetlands all around the world are diminishing, and they're very important no matter what type of wetland they are. You see, wetlands can be dams, lakes, rivers, mangroves. The wetlands that we are dealing with are headwater wetlands because we are located here in Harare on top of the watershed on the Mashonaland Plateau. There are 5 different streams that arise in Harare, making various rivers. We are at the top of the watershed, and those rivers arise out of these headwater wetlands. The rivers people may recognize are the Mukubisi, the Manyami, the Marimba. The Mukubisi and the Marimba flow into the Manyami. There's the Gwibi, and the Mazoe arises here in Hatcliffe. So you see all of these open green grassy spaces are headwater wetlands, which are creating the streams. So we all drive around Harare and see open spaces around us, but we don't realize that those are headwater wetlands. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's difficult to describe them because you can't see the water. Mm-hmm. It's there. In the summer if it rains, and it's quite a complicated process which I'll describe a bit later. But I just wanted people to understand that Harare is at a high level here. We don't have snowy mountains to turn to for runoff, for dam filling above us. We are creating that here in Harare. We need these areas, but I'll describe that a bit later.
Oh, okay. So you're saying we need these areas as like water store for our water consumption, or the water that we need.
Yes. So these very wide open spaces look as if they are being wasted, but actually they're the opposite. They have these open headwater grassy spaces are receiving rainwater, and the water seeps off nearby hills through the roots of the trees. It goes down the leaves, down the trunk and into the roots, and it seeps off the hills into these grassy spaces, and the rain also falls on the grassy spaces. These headwater wetland areas have very rich biodiversity. We've counted over 200 different plant species, including invasive plants as well as nearby trees. And these are treeless areas. One mustn't plant trees in them. If you see trees in them, then you take them out because they've come from disturbance like agriculture. So they're not naturally there on the open grassy wetlands. The structure of the vegetation on these open spaces is crucial in amongst these 200 different plant species. The grasses are different from other grasses elsewhere. They're very thin, they have very thin leaves. The rain falls on them. These leaves draw the water into the soils. They are greeted by these clumpy roots, not lateral roots, clumpy ones, and you'll see the spaces between these grasses if you walk in the wetlands. This is how the structure of these grasses are formed, and it's fascinating. If you come into the field, we always say come into the field, come into the wetlands, we'll show you, because you can't teach this on a podcast. You can't teach it in a classroom. You have to be in the field. People can't get it. So I think that's really important, that structure of how the grasses work in these wetlands, the types of grasses, how they work. And I really advise everyone to join us for a walk on Mona Vale Flair, so they can see how these areas work.
Right. So Dorothy, you've highlighted 2 points that I understood about the importance of wetlands, which is their store for water, and 2, they contribute to environmental biodiversity.
Yes.
And then the next question would be, why do you think wetlands are under siege in Harare if they play such an important role?
Well, in Africa and other places, you'll see a great movement from rural areas into cities, and Harare is no exception. They are forecasting that it will become even greater, this movement in Africa of people from the rural to the urban. In the case of Harare, we've seen a great movement of people from the rural areas over the last 20 years for socio-economic, political, different reasons. And the main one is probably economic. People want to get jobs. So it's a buzzing, vibrant, attractive place to be in. People want to be here. But it has this constraint of having run out of land for building on because of these wetland areas. It's not useful to build on a wetland. If you build on the wetland and you cover the whole city with concrete, then you are committing the city to rainfall runoff during the summer months alone. So that you're not then storing the water under the ground, which is the job that wetlands do free of charge. They store the water, they purify it, they regulate the flow into the streams during droughts and dry seasons. They do jobs like that we can't imagine. They replenish the groundwater, all because of the biodiversity. And the biodiversity makes the soils underneath. So that combination is very fragile and very needed. So then if you've got concrete everywhere, you just get runoff down to the lake. And as you can see now already, Chivero is spilling. That water is off down to the sea. If we have more of these open grassy wetlands restored, a lot more of that water will stay under the ground. We've also have a problem with agriculture on these wetlands. That's not just building. The agriculture has many, many negative effects on these wetlands, one of which is siltation. So you'll see that Lake Chivero has 20% of its capacity, storage capacity, taken up with siltation, and that's growing because the cropping has never been as widespread as it is now in the city. And so you've got less space in there so that spilling sooner than it might have if it had more capacity. So there are many impacts onto these wetlands, but the exciting thing is that agriculture can take place on farms, or different types of plants can be grown in people's yards or on their verandas if they have food security issues. The cropping can take place in the farms. The buildings, well, they can be another city maybe. People can brainstorm what can be done, expand other cities, or many of our cities are on watersheds and experience the same problems as Harare. So a think tank on future developments, which we need development, but in the right places. So this has to be dealt with. We do need water. These wetlands provide us with that water during the 7 months of droughts, dry seasons and droughts. If you can think about us not having water for 7 months, how come these streams are flowing? As we put more agriculture and more buildings and cover up these wetlands, our streams are stopping that flow during the dry season, whereas they always used to flow. 10 years ago, our streams never stopped flowing. Now they do. And also one of the big jobs that these wetlands do is to store carbon. People aren't aware that wetlands around the world, including our headwater PT grassland wetlands, store more carbon under the soil than trees do. So that's not known, and we need to get that information out there. We need these areas as much as we need trees, but both of them need to be in the right places. So we've observed a lot about these mechanisms of how in Harare our water is available. So yeah.
All right. So Dorothy, you were talking about agriculture building on wetlands having a negative effect on them and their ability to be a store for water and also a contributor to biodiversity. So I wanted to ask you, in the last 10 years, how many hectares of wetlands have we lost to human activity in Harare?
The people who've been doing the mapping in Harare Wetlands Trust have noticed that the wetlands remaining 10 years ago from losses over the previous 100 years, those that were left, 50% of those remaining ones 10 years ago have been lost in the last 10 years to development. All of Harare's wetlands, except 34 hectares here in Monavale on the core area of the Monavale Ramsar site, most of those wetlands are under agriculture now. So we have a very radical view of what's happening to these wetlands. So that's agriculture, but you'll see more and more housing developments encroaching into the wetlands. And that's all over the city. So with Harare Wetlands Trust, we have created, but I'm sure that'll be another question, residents. We haven't created them, they've created themselves, residents organizations around the city who are very alarmed about what's happening in their wetlands and the encroachment of housing into their wetlands. So we've lost 50% of what would remain 10 years ago, and it's moving fast. It seems during the winter months, people don't realize that these areas are wetlands, and they very happily buy stands on these areas, and then they come to today where you're swimming in water in Mayfield Estate inside your house, and wondering why, you know. So there are many negative effects. We are concerned about the diminishing water availability for everyone. All the other situations everything can be resolved, but there's got to be a will to resolve it.
So Dorothy, this year the focus on World Wetlands Day is actually talking about sustainable use. Like the theme for this year's World Wetlands Day is Wetlands Action for People and Nature, and it's highlighting the importance of actions that ensure that wetlands are conserved and sustainably used. Do you think there's been enough action from authorities to save wetlands in Zimbabwe?
I think that you'll see that as a result of the flooding at the beginning of last year, the beginning of 2021, the authorities were faced with flooding in Chitungwiza and many other areas of the city. The same has happened this year, but perhaps not so noticeably. But as a result of that flooding, the wetland a wetland map was produced for Zimbabwe. There were guidelines and master plans and all sorts of documents were produced to protect wetlands. So there was action that government took from that, and we've also been approached to work on restoration guidelines. So there's lots of positive things that are happening, but the issue arises that many of the wetlands have already been sold. So there's a dilemma as to how to find solutions to areas that have been sold. How are those brought back? So I think that the authorities, the ministries and the agencies are all concerned about how that can be resolved. I think that there is a lot of action, but actually getting the other land or making a plan for compensation and all of those things are pretty complex. Mm-hmm. And so we're faced with kind of a gridlock, I would say, on which way to move with resolving the situation of retaining these wetlands for water provisioning, because we've all got a water issue. I don't know anyone who hasn't. So we have to manage this, and we can manage it. We can retrieve these wetlands. We know how to restore them. We've done this at Mona Vale. So there are plenty of positive outcomes that could come from a city that does have water into the future. At the moment, we are on a knife edge with that. It's possible that in the future we won't. I know that people who ran out of groundwater for their boreholes during this last year, it still hasn't replenished. That groundwater takes a long time to replenish. So people are still receiving bowls of water. So it's a very, very big topic to discuss in a short time. But certainly governments have got these tools to manage wetlands now. They have created them recently, and they're there to use, and we're still waiting to see how that's going to happen.
And there's a thing about us human beings reacting to certain situations. We only react to when things have really gone bad. That's when we start thinking about doing the right thing or adopting good policies. So I wanted you to give us a picture of, let's say we've built on all wetlands. There are no wetlands in Harare. There's nothing left. What kind of a world, what kind of a situation are we looking at? How will it affect me as an individual?
Oh dear, that's a scenario that could quite well happen. You won't have water, so you will have to buy water from somewhere. Where that water will come from is anyone's guess, because at the moment it's coming in bowsers. We have this. You can close your eyes and picture that the 3 months of rainfall that landed up in Chivero has already been used up. It's been pumped back to the city, and it's gone already after a couple of months into the dry season. And we don't have any groundwater anymore because we can't. It's not there. And now we are dependent on individual complexes and houses receiving water through bowsers. Well, the bowsers have got to go further afield to try and find this water. So I always say that you've seen cities over the last thousands of years that have dried up and moved off somewhere else because they've run out of water. And this is happening today in the Middle East, in various countries. There's a lot of migration because there's no water, not necessarily for political reasons. Water is the issue. So we would probably move to another town, maybe. I don't know how industry would work without water. We just assume it's going to be there for our own use, and that assumption is built into planning and to planning at every level, and it needs to be revisited urgently, because that picture of having no water could well happen in this city.
All right.
It's in our faces already. I see people going across the road here to a water hydrant, which they've opened up, and they take water from there. They don't get, we have to buy water ourselves. We're surrounded by wetland. You don't go into the wetland and get water. You wait for it to come through the pipes from Chivero. So it's certain areas cannot sink boreholes. Our area, that's the case. We have to buy water. So the wetlands are to keep the streams and rivers flowing, to fill up the lakes, and to have the water pumped back again. The groundwater, we have to watch how much we use of that. But if it's all covered up and we're heading in that direction, then it's going to be very little water for the city may have to shut down. That is a scenario you could see into the future. That's my view. And I think that's shared by many people. And that's why Harare Wetlands Trust and our organization, the Conservation Society of Mona Vale, exist, because of this alarm about the availability of water for everyone.
We keep learning how important it is to conserve wetlands, because it could be a whole shutdown of a whole city or a whole country if we're not looking after our wetlands.
Yeah, it's very, very important in Zimbabwe, because all these towns are sitting on the watershed. These watersheds are making the streams and rivers that flow into the Limpopo, the Mazoe, the Manyami, and off down to the Zambezi, and we're making them up here at the top here. This is the very precious area that we need to nurture. And of course, it's easy. It's like fishing in an aquarium. You can go and fish in a small dam or an aquarium, but you've got to stock it somehow. And once you've taken it all out and there's nothing there and you can't stock it again, what are you going to do about it? That's the kind of analogy we use when we're teaching. We also show, because we've had many thousands and thousands of school children come to Mona Vale for education on these headwater wetlands, and other students and public and organizations, they've all come to Mona Vale to learn about these wetlands. And we hold up a saturated sponge. We put a sponge into a bowl of water, hold it up, and you can see the water dripping out slowly. That's how our wetlands work. But if you take that sponge that's full of water and stand on it, the water goes out instantly. And that's what we're doing right now, is we're standing on the sponge. We can reverse that standing on the sponge, and we can make a plan. We've got an unusual city. It's very tempting for developers to see open spaces and feel that they're wasted the way they are. But they've always been there for a reason, and there are laws and bylaws to protect them. And that I think that the developments and agriculture can all go elsewhere, but we can't actually manage water elsewhere in the same way as it's happening with these natural areas that do the work for us for free.
Okay, Dorothy, lastly, what ongoing programs does your organization have that are teaching members of the public about the importance of wetland conservation?
We relate to a lot of communities in low and high density areas when they raise the alarm that something's going wrong with their wetlands. So we then go in and say, this is what the law is, these are the rights that you have to address these situations. One of the as an aside, sometimes you can't get access to the building permits as residents and the environmental impact assessments to see whether the authorities have given these permits for people to develop in these areas. So we then raise the awareness that residents have the right to access this information in order to take a stand against building and agriculture on their wetlands. So that's one of the major education awareness work that's done by Harare Wetlands Trust. That's a major area. The other area is reaching out into the media, as I'm doing now with you, and trying to get the public to realize that there are options to losing our wetlands. And so the media is a very, very important player. And then the other area we work with is education and awareness with many universities. Much research has happened out there as a result of our protection of Mona Vale. And so it's led to many master's degrees and undergraduate degrees and various bits of research and education in the field. So that's the sort of thing that we do. We reach out to residents, or they reach to us. So it moves both ways. And so we've got a big voice around town. I think that's why you've called, because you've heard about us from somewhere. So that's the sort of work we do. It's building up the capacity of residents to take a stand, and the media, and research and education and awareness, and many other things. It would take too long to describe all the bits and pieces that if you took a look at our phones and saw all the interaction that's going on all the time, people are alarmed because they don't have water readily available. And they can see the link now, which is very encouraging.
Well, thank you so much, Dorothy, for coming to the program, and thank you for all the work that you're doing as Harare Wetlands Trust to try and nurture and conserve our wetlands.
Thank you, Nancy, and it's been good to be on your program and to meet you. Thank you for taking an interest in the wetlands.
Today on the program, we're joined by Dorothy, and I hope we now have a better understanding on the importance of wetlands and why it's important to conserve them. Thank you again to all our listeners. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow us on our social media pages. Our handle is EcovilleZW on all platforms. Join us next week for another episode. I'm your host, Nonsikelelo Kwaka.